Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine Venice podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 3, Episode 18, The Boyfriend Part 2. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. Happy Julia Louis-Dreyfus birthday. I'm recording this on January 13th, which is Julia's birthday, which is very exciting. She's 61 today. I don't know when any of you will be listening to this. It could be the 14th when I release it, or I don't know, 5 years from now. But anyway, just know that I am standing here recording this on Julia Louis-Dreyfus's actual birthday, her 61st birthday. I just posted on the Hot and Heavy Instagram that we wish her a very happy birthday and that I hope she enjoys some cake, whether it be vintage or an Entenmann's, whatever it is. I hope she really enjoys some cake. And speaking of, I don't think I've mentioned in a while, if you would like to follow this podcast on Instagram, we are Hot Heavy Elaine. So if you just search up Hot Heavy Elaine, you'll see our beautiful logo and just some fun posts. It's a fun part of doing this podcast. I like updating maybe some funny Seinfeld memes I've seen, or for example, when I was watching the US Open a few months ago, I saw a bald man like Kramer. There was a bald person behind the player as he was serving, and I'm going, that guy has gray hair. Oh my God, it's a bald man. I've watched tennis for over 30 years and I have never seen a bald man. So good job, Kramer. You're keeping that alive. So anyway, that's just an example of stuff I put on the Instagram account if it's not related directly to an episode that I've posted. So yes, happy birthday to JLD. Very excited you were born because I get to do this podcast. And really, isn't that what it was all about? Other than that, I'm feeling way better than the last time I recorded. I wasn't even feeling that bad at that time, but I did find out while I was editing the podcast last week that I tested positive for COVID. Oh man, that was a roller coaster. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. It just seems like, even if you're triple vaxxed, which I am, it doesn't prevent you. No one has ever claimed that this vaccine prevents you from getting it altogether, but it can help you have a milder case of the virus. And that was certainly true for me. I had that sore throat, which I can't lie was pretty brutal. But other than that, considering what people go through when they have this virus, it was very mild. So very thankful for that. I will say I experienced more than anything after finding that out. I don't know, I was kind of embarrassed and I felt depressed. Yeah, it's hard to explain. But once I got those results, at first I was just kind of like, okay, well, what do I do? And by that point, I was well past the 10 days of the onset of my symptoms. So they kind of say, okay, you have to wait that long. Well, I guess now they've shortened it to 5 days. So I was well past that. So technically, I was pretty certain I wasn't contagious anymore. And I was also glad that I had made the good decision to not really go out during the time I was feeling sick. I'd canceled plans. Glad I did that. However, I was in the house with my family. So that kind of freaked me out a little bit, and we're still monitoring for symptoms. And, I don't even want to say it, but my family did not display any kind of symptoms the entire time I was sick and for days after. Anyway, I hope all of you out there are doing well. I know that we are all feeling anxiety and frustration and just so many emotions for so many different reasons. And I don't know, all I can say is find some time to laugh and unplug a little bit, get off your damn phones. That's as much advice for me as it is for anyone out there. I need to get off my fucking phone most of the time because, it always ends up making me angry or scared or upset. At any rate, I think I'm past it and really, I feel, again, really lucky in a weird way that I was able to, not that I feel lucky to get it, but that I had a really mild case and I'm past feeling depressed about it and shameful about it. I just, this is the world we live in now, and I think it's just going to be tougher and tougher to avoid it. But what is not tough is to make the decision to protect yourself against getting a severe form of the disease. So do all that you can, and maybe you'll just get through it like I did with a few days of a sore throat, and then you pretty much move on with your life. Okay, so let's just move on and get into this episode. The synopsis for The Boyfriend Part 2 is as follows. Jerry and Kramer visit a former neighbor's new baby whom Kramer ends up injuring. Jerry's relationship with Keith Hernandez ends when Keith asks him to help him move. George takes out his unemployment counselor's unattractive daughter to keep his unemployment benefits coming. Kramer and Newman learn that another Mets player spit on them, so they volunteer to help Keith move. Elaine breaks up with Keith when she discovers he's a smoker. Again, this episode was written by Larry David and Larry Levin. So we start out in the unemployment office. George is just pleading with Mrs. Sokol, saying, that guy who answered the phone at Vandalay Industries, he was the one that interviewed me. I knew exactly who it is. He was very threatened by me, and he's just trying again to plead his case and do anything he can to get this extension. And after she just is not giving in at all and says, just sign this paper already, George is about to surrender, but then he sees this photo on her desk. It's her daughter, and George says, "This is your daughter? She is breathtaking." Breathtaking. The only way, apparently, in Seinfeld to say someone is very attractive. And Mrs. Sokol's a little bit surprised. You think so? He says, you know what? Take this away from me. Take it away. I can't get distracted. Mrs. Sokol says she doesn't even have a boyfriend. Oh, okay. Okay. Are you trying to play a joke on me? You're trying to trick me? Because there's no call for that. I'm serious. Would you like her phone number? George. The hand over the mouth reaction. I mean, he's really, really putting it on here for Mrs. Sokol. Then he asks, well, where should I sign this? Oh, no. She hands over the phone number. He's avoided once again to cut off his extension. The next scene, we are on the date with Keith and Elaine. They're at a bar and surrounded by a bunch of people. And then Elaine asks, so tell me about this game 6. And he just gives a little bit of a breakdown, what where they were in the game, facing elimination, basically. And she grabs him and makes this sound like, oh, so scary. The purpose of the scene, we're just advancing the storyline between Keith and Elaine. They're on the date now. And my take, it's such a short clip of a scene, but JLD makes it entertaining. I mean, I think this is a record. How short is this scene? But you can tell Elaine's, she's in her element. She's so excited. Tell me about this game 6, and just really enjoying her time with Keith. And then the capper with the, oh, it's always been really funny. So the next scene, Jerry and Kramer are seeing the baby. And we get a shot of a very cute little baby. And I like the camera angle of the point of view of the baby. Kramer's doing the coochie coochie coo. And Jerry's just saying, hello, how are you? Carol just can't help it. Jerry, do you love her? Yes, I do love her. Carol is played by Lisa Mende. This is her first performance as Carol. She will go on to appear in 3 more episodes in the run of the series. And she has acted in numerous television shows and films. And she was actually married to Dom Herrera, who is another Seinfeld alum. He was the prop comic who's always concerned about my nostrils getting bigger. And I think she's great in this role. I mean, she is one of the most quotable characters on Seinfeld. You gotta see the baby. I also quote her, and I'll say this again when I cover this episode, but because we've been watching Harry Potter as a family so much, because my daughter is obsessed, and Ralph Fiennes plays Voldemort, I always quote the episode from The English Patient where she says, oh, that Ralph Fiennes, I would give up my firstborn for him, or whatever. But I always, whenever Voldemort appears, I always go, oh, that Ralph Fiennes. It's really annoying to my family, but that's sort of my job. So yes, I think she's so effective in this role. I think she's really funny. She's so quotable, and she's just got that great way of delivering the lines. It kind of reminds me of Siobhan Fallon as Tina, just the high line. Just another great actress with a delivery that's so memorable. So big fan of this performance. I love that Kramer, being Kramer, says that the baby looks like Lyndon Johnson. No, I'm not joking. She looks like Lyndon Johnson. And then Carol tells Michael, go get the camera. We need to take a picture. I don't know where it is. It's in the bottom drawer of a dresser. Hurry up. I love that moment because he starts walking away, and when she yells, hurry up at him, And he just starts running this like pathetic little shuffle. It's just one of those things I always notice. My eye always goes to him just running like an idiot. And then she says, he's such an idiot. They establish so much about this character and this relationship within like the first 30 seconds of this scene. It's so funny. And she asks Jerry, you want to pick her up? Jerry doesn't want to, but Kramer says, I'll pick her up. And you hear a no. That yell from off camera has always baffled me. I had no idea where it was coming from. It sounded like Jason Alexander to me. It sounded like George screaming it. But of course, that would make no sense. And Seinfeld doesn't do weird sound effects for the hell of it. So I just chalked it up to like, all right, this is some weird moment where they decided to put in George screaming for some reason. I don't know. But thanks to the Notes About Nothing, it was clarified that yelling of no, it's coming from Michael, the husband the idiot who just ran away to get the camera. So it's him screaming no as a reaction to Kramer picking up the baby. And in fact, if you look at the very tail end of that scene, when you hear that scream, you see a shadow of Michael sort of coming back around that corner in the hallway. So it's explained. I still think it's bizarre because it doesn't at all sound like someone screaming from a hallway. It just sounds like it's coming out of nowhere. I don't know. It's not very effective, and it always baffled me. But I'm glad to know, I'm glad to have it clarified that that's Michael, the husband, screaming at the notion of Kramer picking up his baby. All right, so the next scene, we see George and Carrie Sokol at the end of their date. They're in George's car, and she thanks him for a lovely evening and that she hadn't had a Big Mac in a long time. Now, Carrie is played by Carol Ann Susi. She's probably best known as Debbie Wolowitz on The Big Bang Theory, where you only heard her voice. She played the mother of Howard Wolowitz. Full disclosure, I never really watched Big Bang Theory, but I kind of had seen sporadic episodes on TBS here and there to know enough that Howard's mother never made an appearance, but you always heard her screaming from like the back of the house or something at Howard. So that was probably her biggest role. But she also guest starred in basically, I looked at her IMDb, every television show of the 80s and 90s into the 2000s she worked. But unfortunately, we lost Carol Ann Susi in 2014. She died of cancer at the age of 62. And she is fantastic in this role. I absolutely love this performance. It's one of my favorite performances of the entire series. The reason I love it so much is because she plays it so understated. Now, with a character like this, which can so easily become like a caricature, right? Oh, the unattractive date. I feel like on another, more sitcom-y sitcom, it would be served very over the top, very exaggerated. But between the writing of this episode and Carol Ann Susi's performance, it's just a very grounded woman who doesn't come off as anyone you'd want to really date or be around, And I think for me, what gets me every time is just the dead look in her eyes. There's no emotion basically in her whole face, but in her eyes especially. She just stares at George and delivers her dialogue so matter of fact, barely reacting to anything George says. It's so perfect. And it just couldn't have been played any other way and been as funny. She is fantastic. I mean, are you going to call me when you get home? Tonight? Yes. Like it's in her voice. You can hear some inflection, but the eyes stay dead the whole time. It's great. And another thing that no one out there will really understand is that she reminds me of my uncle. I mean, they have really the exact same face. The teeth are the same, everything. So whatever, just for your knowledge, file it in your who cares bin, but she looks exactly like one of my uncles. So anyway, they're having this conversation. George is just taking her to McDonald's, apparently. And she asks, would you like to come up? And George, of course, would not want to, but he just tells her, I got to get up early, got to look for work, And she points out, but it's Saturday, all the offices are closed. And he says, well, I have myself an interview at a hardware store. I mean, it fascinates me. Wouldn't you love to make a key? And once again, no reaction, just kind of staring, maybe a little bit of a shrug. And then she asks if he'll call as soon as he gets home. I love the clarification. Tonight? Yes. What do you think? Well, you kill me. You really kill me. And then after a beat or two, she says, well, good night, and goes in for a kiss. Now, I really would love to know who came up with her lunging forward with her mouth slightly open and her tongue kind of coming out. It's just so gross and so perfect. I've always loved that too. And then when we flip the angle to see George he's definitely looking down at her mouth going, what? Who goes in for a kiss with their mouth it's this almost like this mouth, it's like a rat mouth. Like what? Not a good move, Carrie Sokol. I hate to tell you. And moving on, back just a quick little scene at Carol and Michael's place. Baby is crying. I think we're to assume that Kramer dropped the baby, injured the baby somehow. Oh, the baby. Okay, then we move on to the end of Elaine's date. She's in Keith's car. And once again, sort of a callback to the end of Jerry and Keith's outing. We have the voiceover, kind of what do we do now at the end of the date? There's a voiceover for Keith, pondering whether or not he should kiss her. Voiceover for Elaine, wondering, isn't he going to try and kiss me? They make some awkward small talk. Love Cajun food. I'm a quarter Cajun. My father's half drunk. Always make reference to Alton Bennis being very drunk. So then the awkward moments are just kind of building up, and we hear in their minds just going, come on, something's got to happen here. And Elaine says she thinks, this is getting awkward. But then, sure enough, Keith gets the courage and says, well, good night. Goes in for it, basically the opposite way that Carrie Sokol went in for it. And they start kissing between a peck and a makeout, we find out. And I like the final voiceover. Who does this guy think he is? I'm Keith Hernandez. Purpose of this scene, again, we're furthering the Keith and Elaine storyline of them dating. And my take, I like the parallel between the end of this date and Jerry's date. In the car, the voiceover thoughts, a kiss versus a handshake. Very clever. It's a short scene again, but it's more to just show what happened and create the tension for this next scene. So let's get to the next scene. We're in Jerry's apartment. Elaine is telling Jerry about the date and that Mookie was there. Do you know him? And Jerry, just his eyes well, I don't know him, but I know he is. And then she's just trying to drop knowledge on him as if he doesn't know. He's the one who, yeah, I know, he got the hit in Game 6. I love that reaction. I said it so much in the last episode, but Jerry Seinfeld, really top-notch performance from him. I love right away when she says Mookie and just he kind of, stands up a little straighter, his eyes get bigger. He's just so bummed. Like, why didn't I get to meet Mookie? And then Jerry gets a little nosy. They're good friends. I don't know if it's very nosy, but he's a little uncomfortable asking it. So did you two have... Elaine knows where he's going. What? She wants him to say it. Milk. Cookies. Well, did he kiss you goodnight? At first, she just doesn't want to tell him. Well, what do you mean you don't know? Okay, he kissed me. And then Jerry's like, okay, the floodgates are open. What kind of kiss? You got to describe it. So she says, okay, fine. It was between a peck and a makeout. So you like him. And Elaine is just like, what? I don't understand. Before, you were jealous of me. Now you're jealous of him? I'm jealous of everybody. Phone rings. It's Keith. Jerry has a short conversation with him, and when he hangs up, it looks like he's kind of bothered or concerned. Elaine asks what's going on, and he says, Keith just asked me to help him move. He doesn't feel right about it. That's a big step. It's like going all the way in a male relationship. And Elaine's being a good friend, like, well, you don't feel like you're ready? Well, we only went out one time. Isn't this coming on too strong? And Kramer enters, feels a vibe, so asks what's going on. Now, Keith Hernandez just asked me to help him move. What? Kramer's appalled. What nerve? And then when he finds out Jerry's going to do it, he's so ashamed. You said yes? How can you prostitute yourself like this? Then he says, next thing you know, you'll be driving him to the airport. I'm not driving him to the airport. Oh, Kramer's disgusted. He's got to go. Jerry asks, hey, don't mention it to anybody. I wish you never mentioned it to me. And I love the little look that Kramer gives Elaine right before he closes his door, like, Can you talk to him? I can't with this guy. So the purpose of this scene, we learn Jerry's mixed emotions about Keith and Elaine, and that Jerry, he's not sure he's ready for a big step in this relationship with Keith. In my take, the top of the scene has one of my favorite interactions between Elaine and Jerry in the entire series. It's so well acted by both of them. And that line, I just love it, that I'm jealous of everybody, that Jerry says. Because something like jealousy, which I believe is such a pointless emotion, but yet doesn't, stop everyone from having it from time to time. But it can really sneak up on you when you least expect it. I know I've gone through that. And now neither of them, Elaine or Jerry, have shown jealousy for a while. I mean, not since the first season. And so this comes out of nowhere, and it's just as surprising for both of them as it is for us, the audience. So I really like that moment. And here again, we see this double entendre theme of the episode going all the way in a male relationship is helping with the move. And so, I just love that. I think it's so effective. Jerry's performance, it delivers again. This entire scene, from that moment when Elaine mentions Mookie, like I said, that reaction he has there, to the phone call with Keith, it's just really well done. And I love Kramer's reaction here too. You said yes. It's a great contrast between the friends. Elaine is more gentle and sort of letting Jerry feel his feelings, and Kramer is the friend who just doesn't let you get away with being disrespectful to yourself. He's not going to let you get away with that. And like I said before, the look to Elaine before he leaves is priceless. All right, so the next scene, we are at the end of the second date between George and Carrie, Sokol. It's a little different vibe, though. She's not feeling it, doesn't invite him to come up, but he knows the drill. He says, I will call you as soon as I get home. And she says, don't bother. I would prefer it if you didn't. Basically, she's done. It's over, buddy. Adios. Sayonara. I won't do the whole scene, even though I love this scene. But basically she says, you got no job, you got no prospects, you're like Biff Loman, call back to what Jerry calls him quite often. And he tries to defend himself by lying, but saying, I went to the hardware store interview. And she says, you think I'm going to spend my life with somebody because they can get me a deal on a box of nails? I love that line. I don't know why. It's the delivery, but it's like, and her little kind of gesture with her head after she says that line and looks out the window and looks back at him. Like I said, I have studied this performance because I think it's just absolutely brilliant. George really can't say anything to keep her, keep this going. So she exits the car, but not without a killer exit line, which is, if I ever need a drill bit, I'll call you. It's so great. George knows what this means. Oh, man, he is not going to be able to keep his unemployment. So he yells out the car, could you not mention this to your mother? Moving on, we are in the bar with Keith and Elaine. This is their second date. And they're very cozy, kind of leaned into each other. I'm going to say probably a little tipsy. They're drinking wine and having a great time. And Keith is bragging about his gold gloves that he got. And, since she mentioned it, even though she didn't mention it. And then she says, so you played first base. And that she played first base. And the only reason she did was because she was the worst player. And then they get into this base conversation about, she doesn't know the first thing about first base. Well, I know you'll never get there. Oh, he's already been there and he's planning on rounding second later that night. But she says, you're not getting to third base tonight. That coach is not waving you in. They're just having such a great time, such great chemistry. And she says, even though she knows it's probably really corny, we're really hitting it off. Get it? And while Keith is laughing at her little corny joke, he pulls out something from his pocket. Oh, it's a pack of cigarettes. Elaine says, you smoke? Yeah. I didn't know you smoked. Is that a problem? Purpose of this scene? Well, we see the end of the Keith and Elaine romance. My take. So we get treated to the most delightful, flirty Elaine here in this scene. I love that laugh in the beginning when Keith says, I don't mean to brag. And she just laughs really hard. It's a little distracting and it makes me think maybe she was just breaking a bit there. But I kind of reflected on that and I thought, no, she's such a great laugh actor, as I've mentioned before on this podcast. So I just think JLD made this choice that Elaine's a little tipsy here and she's also just having such a great time. She's so attracted to him and kind of giddy about that. So, yeah, I just think it was a really interesting choice to kind of laugh that hard. So I am curious what all of my dear listeners out there, what everyone thinks first, second, third base. What does it mean to you guys in reference to sexual acts, obviously? Now, growing up, I believe it was in junior high, I remember learning about what these meant, and that first base was kissing, more specifically Frenching, tongue kissing, however you want to say it. Second base was going up the shirt, a little booby play. And third base was something downtown, something below the equator. For either gender, it was some kind of a hand stimulation down there, dong or vag play, if you want to get scientific about it. And then there was going all the way, sliding into home base, whatever. And that meant like full sex, sexual intercourse. That's what it was. So I was curious. I'm like, is that right? I don't even know. I just know that's what I grew up in Royal Oak, Michigan. That's what it was defined at Churchill Junior High. Because that was also the time when, not me, but I was hearing about people doing things that, quite frankly, scared me at that age, scared the hell out of me. You couldn't find me doing any of that stuff. Certainly wasn't mature enough for that, but plenty of friends who were Frenching in corners of parties or in the hallways at school, and then hearing about other things. Yeah, and it was defined by these bases. And I remember hearing about some third base activity amongst some of my friends I'd known since kindergarten. And, I played it cool, as cool as I could at the time. I was just like, oh, you did? Wow, cool. And then waiting till I was alone to go like, what? She did that? He did that to her? Like, it was a lot of like overstimulation, pardon the pun, for me to hear all this stuff from my friends. I did none of it at that time, but it was that time in your life where you grow up so fast or people around you grow up so fast. And it's a little bit jarring for the sheltered kids like me with strict parents who didn't allow any of that stuff to even, didn't allow for situations where that could even remotely happen. So anyway, back to the base conversation. I did a quick Google search that pretty much confirms my definition of the first, second, third base with a few minor changes. Some lists I saw said that third base implied oral stimulation instead of manual. But for the most part, what I was taught back in the early 90s, and so around the time this episode came out, was pretty accurate. So basically what we can glean from that is that Elaine is telling Keith she does not want any below the equator action just yet. But she seems fine with some booby play later that night, around 11:30, I think he said. So cool, we know what Elaine wants that night. Well, I don't think it happened since, we know she can't stand cigarettes. And that turn from being so enamored and giddy with him to just complete disgust when she sees those cigarettes, it's quick and it's very well played by JLD. And I love how it ends with Keith asking her if that's a problem and her face just saying it all. Yeah, it's pretty similar, kind of a callback to when he asks Jerry about, are you sure you're okay with me calling Elaine? Where it's not verbal, but you just see it written all over Jerry's face. You see it written all over Elaine's face here at the end going, no, this isn't okay. Gross. And this is what I love about Elaine. She stays true to who she is. I mean, she is gaga about Keith, super into him, but she knows herself well enough to know that smoking is a deal breaker no matter who the guy is. And I love that I had this example to look up to when I was so young, even though I didn't really follow it, unfortunately. I for sure didn't do what Elaine did here, just kind of staying true to yourself. Didn't do it for too many years. And it kind of makes me cringe a little bit to this day. I know I compromised some of my opinions and beliefs because, for longer than I'd like to admit, I'd put the affections of a guy I really liked over my convictions, and it seems so gross and cringy now. And this is something I'm trying to instill, especially in my daughter, just going listen to your gut. If this is something that makes you feel gross or icky, or you just don't believe in something, extract yourself from a situation. But you know what? I didn't do it. So I guess, I'm just trying to instill that in my daughter and then learn from the mistakes. We all make bad love decisions in our lives, don't we? And we just have to live and learn. Okay, so I'll go through these next scenes pretty quickly. That was Elaine's last scene in the episode. We're back at Monk's, and Jerry's telling George about Elaine really liking Keith and that they're a perfect match. They're like brother-sister couple. They go together. George hates those couples. And then we see this little, almost a tender moment that Jerry has where he says, I know this is a little arrogant, but I never thought she'd find someone she liked better than me, but I guess I had my chance and that's that. We get that little bit of a moment of Jerry really kind of opening up and showing some vulnerability there. And what does George do? He doesn't acknowledge it at all. We couldn't get more Seinfeld than that. I think that was so perfect. George completely out of nowhere says he really wants to have sex with a tall woman, like a giant, like 6'5". And Jerry says, well, the tallest woman he slept with was 6'3". Oh, that blows George's mind. And then they get into this discussion about their favorite explorer. Apparently it's Magellan for Jerry. Come on, around the world. George likes DeSoto. He discovered the Mississippi. Oh, like they wouldn't have found that anyway. I remember seeing this, again, as a young girl watching this and going like, wow, do people really have favorite explorers? Like, these guys are so smart. And it's a little bit pathetic, I guess, but I know who Magellan and DeSoto are because of Seinfeld. I'm sure I learned it in school, but I certainly didn't stick. But, watching this episode, which was on VHS, I didn't mention that before, many times. I know what Magellan and DeSoto did. And George gets up to leave and says he has to go to the unemployment agency. Jerry can't go long. He's got some stuff to do, and then he's got to meet Keith. He's helping him move. George has that shocked reaction. Next thing you know, you'd be driving him to the airport. I'm not driving him to the airport. So what is driving him to the airport a double entendre for? I just made it up in my head. Like, if helping someone move is like having sex, what is like driving him to the airport's like anal? I don't know. Is it some risky sex? Is it sex in a public place? This is up for our interpretation, you guys. So feel free to send me anything. What's the driving him to the airport a double entendre for? Please. ElainePodcast@gmail.com. Let me know what you think. Back at the unemployment office, George is complaining about Carrie. She's very particular, your daughter. Very particular. I'm not going to beg her. Mrs. Sokol's like, fine, just sign. People are waiting. George tries his last sort of Hail Mary pass here, notices the baseball signed by the Mets, and so he says, I'm a close personal friend of Keith Hernandez. And based on the time and the time he knows that Jerry's going to be meeting up with Keith, he knows he could probably get him to the unemployment agency in about an hour. So she says, fine, you got 1 hour. Back at Jerry's apartment, Keith is letting Jerry know everything he should be aware of. Well, first of all, it's really cold out there, so bring some gloves. He's got a lot of stuff, it should take about 4 hours. Thick coffee table, thick marble. Bed's got a box spring, a 12-piece sectional, but that convertible sofa, it tends to open up when you move it, so it's going to be really hard getting it down the stairs. Stairs? Jerry can't take it anymore. He just said, I can't do it. It's too soon. I don't know you. And then Kramer enters and sees Keith. And what else would he do except do a 360? And, then he confronts him. Oh, you don't remember me. No, should I? Yeah, you should. Newman enters. They tell Keith what happened. And Keith says, I didn't spit at you. So then we go back to the Zapruder film. We see it from a different angle, from Keith's angle. And he says, I saw Roger McDowell from behind the bushes over by the gravelly road. He tried to shout out, but it was too late. Oh, McDowell. Why McDowell? Well, they were cursing at him the whole game and poured a beer on his head. Kramer and Newman feel so bad. They apologize to Keith, and he says, don't worry about it, guys. And he's about to leave. Kramer asks, well, what are you doing? Well, I got to move. Do you want some help? Kramer and Newman couldn't be more excited to help Keith Hernandez. And then Keith warns them, some of the stuff's very valuable. You got to handle it like a baby and no sweat, Kramer says. The phone rings. It's Elaine. And Jerry says, you broke up with him? Me too. He says, oh, smoking. You're like going out with C. Everett Koop. C. Everett Koop was the Surgeon General under Ronald Reagan. And I definitely recognized that name because all the warning labels on the cigarette cartons and packs, they had his signature on it. And then Jerry just said, well, I just didn't feel ready. And George runs in, again, disheveled. And he asks, where's Keith? Where's Keith? And he just missed him. And then he goes to the window, yells out the window, please, Can you come to the unemployment office with me? I'm Jerry's friend. I'm the Chukka. Clearly, Keith is like, no, get the hell out of here. George sits down, very dejected. Well, Biff, what's next? I don't know. And then this very tall woman walks in and says George dropped his wallet. Now, this woman was played by Melanie Good. She's 5'11" in real life and guest starred in a handful of shows in the 90s. In fact, she is also credited as a tall girl in an episode of The Drew Carey Show. She's also a stand-up comedian, a model, and a dancer. There's not a lot to go off of here. She's perfectly fine. I love how her voice is so high-pitched. And she also does a lot of voiceover work, according to her IMDb. So, very effective. All right, I'm going to take a quick break, and I will see you on the other side. Hey, guys. Mitch Thurkelson here, 8th grader at Winston Junior High and co-founder of All About That Bass Incorporated. What's All About That Bass, you ask? It's a sick service I invented with my girlfriend.
That's me, Kaylin Fortenberry. Mitch and I have been together for about a year, and things just keep getting better.
No doubt, Kaylin. Okay, back to our company. All About That Bass provides a service to our junior high classmates that allows them to define comfort zones with their partner. It's all about consent, you guys.
All About That Bass collects what we call your bass boundaries and stores them in a database easily referenced by potential partners.
Before I asked Charlie to hang out, I checked out her profile on All About That Bass, and I found out she wouldn't be cool going to second base. It said first base was her limit. I'm so glad I knew that before because I would have hated to make her uncomfortable.
Thanks, Max. Max is one of almost 500 satisfied members of All About That Bass, and we're growing every single day. The bases are all defined on our website, aatb.consent, and they vary by region. And don't think you'll be trapped by just picking one base. You can curate your comfort by using our pleasure scale. For instance, you're fine with French kissing with a little over-the-bra action. Then you're a first base with a low second base factor. You're cool with full-on boob play and some fully covered dry humping. Then you're a solid second base with a moderate third base factor. There are so many possibilities. All About That Bass works with you to do you, boo.
If you think All About That Bass would help build a consent community in your school, please email me or Mitch at fingering@aatb.consent. That's fingering@aatb.consent. And we'll send you a welcome kit within 48 hours.
All About That Bass.
Let them know how far they can go.
And we're back. So the commentary is JLD, Jason Alexander, and Michael Richards. And I did want to mention that Julia Louis-Dreyfus, just like me, and I'm sure many of you, after the no yelling when Kramer goes in to pick up the baby, she goes, "What's that yell?" She actually says it. No one answers her. They move on to something else, but JLD was confused by it too. So I think that also goes to show you it wasn't very well executed. JLD hates the jacket she's wearing when she's telling Jerry about the date. Mookie was there. She goes, "Oh, look at that revolting jacket, that teal." She just hates it. And then all three of them talk about how rare it was to have a celebrity guest on the show and that they didn't really want to do stuff like that to kind of take away from I guess the grounding or the reality of the show, but they kind of did stray from that in later episodes, later seasons. But this was interesting. Apparently, Paul McCartney loved Seinfeld, a huge fan of the show, and he wanted to do the show. And they never wrote him apart. They were just like, how could we ever make that work? Paul McCartney being on the show. I mean, it's one thing to have Marissa Tomei or James Spader, but Paul McCartney would be probably a little bit too distracting. All of them just love Carol Ann Susi, who plays Carrie Sokol. I mean, they just can't stop talking. Every time she's on screen, they just said, "Oh God, look how good she is." And like I said before, I cannot agree more. And Michael Richards actually said, "They should have made her your wife, George." And Jason Alexander's like, "I know. Can you imagine? That would have been it almost would have been like a Frank and Estelle part 2. So after the scene where JLD sees that Keith smokes, she just drops this bomb, JLD. She says, "I used to smoke." with no follow-up, but I just thought that was interesting. I think everyone of that era, and even now, I mean, everyone smoked at some point in their life. I liked this commentary from Michael Richards so they start talking about this after he does that amazing entrance, after he walks in, sees Keith, and then does that 360 spin. Jason Alexander, JLD, are just laughing so hard. They're like, see, Michael, this is what you do. You do it so well. And Jason Alexander asked that when Wayne Knight, so this I believe is only the second or third episode that Wayne Knight appears in, and that Michael Richards was a little bit resistant at first, thinking that they were just both too over the top together. Maybe he thought Wayne Knight was too over the top. I don't know. They didn't say it that way, but basically that he's like, yeah, no, I really was. It was a concern of mine that it was going to get too broad, but that was something he always battled. So when I say broad comedy, what I mean is it's a style of comedy that's particularly physical, kind of over the top, indecent. It's basically unsubtle. There's no subtlety to a broad type of humor. And so Michael Richards was talking about in this commentary that, that was something he always battled with, where he knew the character so well, he knew the zaniness of it, but that he didn't want it to become like this over the top kind of only physical comedy character. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus kind of, I hope, reassures him and says, you did go broad, but it worked because the broadness was grounded in reality, if that makes sense. And just from a personal perspective, I think that yes, he has these over-the-top moments, but they're also balanced out so well with really grounded moments. So, like, even just in that scene with Jerry about, like, how can you prostitute yourself like that? Like, he's very earnest, and concerned. And so I just think, he might do some physical stuff, a lot of physical stuff, but I think there was a really good balance that I guess apparently he wasn't sure he was achieving, but I think he really did a great job with that. And then they also all talked about how, this was, again, a big episode for them, first hour-long episode. They had Keith Hernandez. It was like all this really great reaction to it, and that they really never realized, and I'm not going to doubt them because this is what they said, but I have a hard time believing it, but they honestly didn't realize how big the show was until the finale, until all the hoopla about the last episode, and that's when it really hit them. But I guess also that just goes to show you how focused they were all the time at just keeping, and this is how they put it too, like we just kept our heads down and made the show. Like we weren't sitting there kind of sitting back and contemplating how big it was or anything like that. So there's something admirable, I think, about that as well. In the notes about nothing, there was a quote from JLD, and it was a comment about being the only woman on the show. She says, "It's not gender specific, but it's not insensitive to women's issues. My character is a woman, but not I am woman. Characters with the gender axe to grind are boring." I think that's a really interesting quote. And I think that's a big reason I really love Elaine, because, you want to talk about how she's a feminist, which she no doubt is, but you're not, I guess, with this type of show, it's a comedy. And with that, it's a light comedy. It's a show about nothing. It's a show that doesn't take themselves too seriously. So it wouldn't make sense to have the only female in the main cast to be sort of this, like, hit you over the head with feminism type thing. It's just, nope, she's just living her life as a feminist, and we see her feminism through her actions. And I love that. I find myself, as I'm trying to watch new shows and discover new things now, it's almost subconscious, but I cannot stand when you're hit over the head with every single character trait when you're being introduced to a character. I won't mention the show, but and it's kind of a dumb reason I don't want to mention it, because I actually hope to work with the creator of this show someday or meet her. But anyway, there have been shows recently where I've watched where it's like, my gosh, there is no subtlety at all. It is just, hey, I'm so-and-so, and because I grew up like this, and that my parents were like this, I'm really like this. I mean, it's like, there's nothing organic about discovering anything about these characters. It's almost like they're just reading off a list of all the things we want you guys to know about us. So I really like this quote from her, where it's like, I'm a woman, my character is a woman, but it's really just showing you who I am through my actions versus, having an axe to grind about being a woman. So I thought that was really great. All right, moving on to Contributor Corner. Greg sent in some thoughts this week. First, Greg says, George's storyline in the second half is one of my favorites of his in the series. I love how he is willing to date this woman just because her mother is the unemployment worker. Both the mother and daughter are played to perfection by the actress's cast. I love when the daughter says, I haven't had a Big Mac in a long time after their date. Cracks me up every time. I'm just imagining him taking her to McDonald's on a date. Oh my gosh, I know, right? Yeah, exactly, Greg. These actresses, wow, so lucky to have found them. And that was a sentiment that Michael Richards especially kept saying, like, I can't believe the talent we got in this show. Look at these women. They're so amazing. Next, Greg says, side note, I cannot stand the you gotta see the baby woman. Like, I literally find her the most grating character of the entire 9-year run. The voice, the giant Florine Mark mane of hair, the brazen pushing for compliments. I get shivers up my spine whenever she appears on the show. Well, all I can say about that, Greg, is that she's a fantastic actress because I think everything you described there was exactly how you were supposed to feel. So kudos to Lisa Mende, whatever her name is. Moving on, Greg says, Elaine's plot with Keith Hernandez gives her more meat in the second half, and I love the voiceovers of the two of them in the car after their date. I also love the follow-up with Jerry being all jealous of the date in which she got to meet other Mets legends. Jerry plays this so well as his FOMO is sending him off the deep end. Yes, it is FOMO. Perfect way to say it. Yes. And agreed. I mentioned it many a times, but yeah, Jerry's acting is so good, especially in that scene. There's something about that reaction when she says Mookie. I could watch it over and over again. And I have. The next thought from Greg. JLD's best scene is on Elaine's second date with Keith, where she's flirting and teasing him about his chances of scoring with her. The baseball double entendres here are perfectly written and delivered. She's merely inches from his face saying these lines, and it's quite sexy, and you can see he's totally into it. I do like the quick flipping of the switch when she realizes he's a smoker. It's a deal breaker for her, and I admire her for sticking to her guns on these issues with otherwise perfect guys. Oh, yes. Yeah, it is sexy. She's being super sexy here. I said flirty, but it's flirty/sexy Elaine in that scene for sure. And yeah, very good with the switch between that really giddy, flirty, sexy to disgust. Love it. And lastly, Greg says, I love the bringing it home with Kramer and Newman confronting Keith on the spitting incident and how they ultimately help him move. I feel like this was the episode where they decided Wayne Knight was there to stay. He's the perfect complement to Kramer in these crazier plot lines. Totally, yes. And I guess to expand a little bit on the whole Wayne Knight and Michael Richards dynamic, it's so interesting because it's in a lot of the inside looks on the DVDs, and I've read some interviews, and I just never got the sense that they were particularly fond of each other. I think they both respected the talent that the other had. I don't know, and we'll probably get to it when I get to the episode I'm remembering, but there was an inside look where I feel like Wayne Knight really is open and says, Michael could be really tough to work with sometimes. I never really knew where I stood with him. So, but clearly just what he says in the commentary, Michael Richards, he was definitely in his head, about, is this too broad or slapsticky or whatever it is. But it's interesting where, the point of view of the actors in the moment doing it, performing it, can be so different from how it is received. Thank you so much, Greg. Always great to get your thoughts. And if you would like to become a contributor to Hot and Heavy, please email me at elainepodcast@gmail.com. That's elainepodcast@gmail.com to become a contributor to this podcast or to let me know what first, second, and third base was in your junior high. My favorite Elaine moment, I love that last scene she appears in, the date with Keith, where she finds out he's a smoker. Her performance is comedic, but with this flirty and feminine energy, totally front and center, sexy energy, as Greg said. And that's so much of what I admire about JLD and her whole body of work. She makes these hilarious choices without sacrificing any of her natural feminine characteristics. And sometimes people don't believe that can be a combination, being super feminine and being funny. And to those folks, I point out Julia Louis-Dreyfus, amongst others. She's not the only one, but obviously I'm the biggest fan of hers. And I respect any female comedian who brings her own flavor to her work, whether that's being feminine or not being feminine, whatever it is, it's all about authenticity. And I know Elaine is a character, but JLD also had to shape a lot of what Elaine was, since, as we know, the character was created without a lot of defined qualities. And so most of those qualities were infused by JLD and her choices and her sensibilities as a comedic actress. And as many of you know, I started watching Seinfeld as a 12-year-old. And I wasn't an extreme girly girl by any means, but I did sort of lean towards being more girly. I couldn't wait to wear makeup. I enjoyed being fashionable with my clothes. I read YM magazine just to keep up on all the latest trends. I mean, bottom line, I wanted to look pretty. I'm not embarrassed to admit that. But I also knew I had this pull to comedy, and I loved being a goofball and making people laugh. And I would go to any lengths to make people laugh, even if that meant being an idiot and looking stupid. So that's why JLD's portrayal of Elaine Benes was so influential for me. She helped me define a lot about my own comedic dreams and how I would like to perform and, hopefully one day be on a show and combine the femininity with the funny. So thanks, JLD. I'm going to thank you so many times during this podcast, but big thank you for that. But I think that is really on display in that scene with Keith, where it's full on being sexy and flirty, but being funny too. Love it. And my final notes. This is an iconic episode, a brilliant episode, so jam-packed with comedy. I also have to give Keith Hernandez props. I mean, for a professional athlete, he did a really good job as an actor. And like pro athletes, not really known for their acting chops. I mean, just watch Michael Jordan on SNL in 1991. I think I'm still scarred from that. Oof, not good. All of the clever dialogue, drawing parallels of the male friendship and a romantic relationship was just done perfectly and in the correct dosage. It wasn't overdone at all. It was done really well, just the right amount. And everyone in the main four got quality screen time in this one. I didn't tally the minutes, but I'm sure JLD probably got the least of it, but considering her plot was with the central character of the episode, Keith Hernandez, I'll forgive it. It's more about the quality than the quantity. And I think that's all I can say about The Boyfriend Part 2. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.